Hello there, 4-H friends. Back in the shop today. My name is Patrick Allen, the Scott County 4-H agent. And today what we're going to do is we're going to take an activity out of the Measure Up Woodworking Level 1 curriculum and talk about measurements. So measuring is an extremely important skill to master when it comes to woodworking or carpentry or framing houses. All those kind of skills are important. So we're going to start off with learning how to read a tape measure. It's really important to understand how a tape measure works and how to read those lines in between each of those inch marks. Okay, so I've got a diagram drawn out here. I'm not the best drawer, but we're going to try to make this work as best we can. So whenever we start, it's important to understand that there are different types of tape measures out there. There are more finish type tape measures that are going to have more measurements in between each of these lines, but for the most part they only go down to a 1/16 of an inch mark. Okay, these are fractions that we're working with, and if you can kind of think of them in that sense, it's going to be a little bit easier for you, meaning there's 2 halves to 1 whole, there's 4 quarters to 1 whole, those kind of things. Okay, so as we get started, we're looking at the spaces between each of those lines. So each space is represented by some sort of fraction. Okay, a fraction of an inch, so 1 inch. So we've got our 1 inch mark right here. We're going to ignore this side. This is just a reference to what it might look like, and then these are what we have listed here. So we're going to start with the smallest one, which is a 1/16 of an inch. And some might say, well, why does a 1/16 of an inch matter? It's not that big. You know, we can throw something together, and if it's a 1/16 inch of off, then it doesn't really matter. It's not going to be that noticeable. But when you're judging a project like myself, those 1/16 of an inch raises in your project are going to be noticeable, and it's something that will be deducted from your project. So you want to take the time, take accurate measurements so that you can make appropriate cuts to make your project look finished. Okay, so 1/16 of an inch is going to be your first mark past that 1 inch mark, or it's going to be the first mark of your tape measure. Okay, so it is the smallest space that you have, and because it is fractions and we're thinking of them as fractions, there are 16 of those to 1 inch, so 1/16 of an inch. The next one is going to be an 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so it's going to be your next space, so that's 2/16 of an inch. So if we're reducing fractions, if we're talking about that, then we're going to, instead of calling it 2/16, we're going to call it an 1/8 of an inch. So this is something to point out. That measurement, 1/8 of an inch, typically is the same width of a saw blade. So, for example, this saw blade, this isn't actually an 1/8 of an inch, this is a 1/16 of an inch. But the teeth are spread apart enough to where it's a little over a 1/16, but that is material that is taken off of your project. And so whenever you're wanting to cut a project in half, so let's say we're going to take this 2x4 and we're going to cut it and make 2 exact halves. Well, if we right now were to measure this board and then divide that in half and then make a mark and cut that mark out, one piece is going to be shorter than the other, and they're not going to be exactly the same because we need to account for that 1/8 or 1/16 saw blade that is taking that material out. So that's really important to kind of understand that that saw is removing material as well as cutting the material into pieces. Okay, so, and it can get really frustrating that at the end of your project, whenever you're done and you go to assemble, things are a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch off because you didn't account for that saw blade width. Okay. The next one is going to be your 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so there's 4 quarters to 1 inch, so there'll be 4 of those spaces in each of those 1 inch marks. Then we have our 1/2 inch mark, okay, which is the second largest next to the 1 inch mark. Okay, so we have 2 halves to one hole. Okay, and so just to kind of show you what I mean by two halves. So we have the one half right here, so going from start to finish, and then from right here to the end of that. So you can consider one half, okay, of that. So keep that in mind. Now, like I said, not all tape measures are the same. They come in different lengths. Some are easy read, meaning that they already have these designations up on the tape measure. Some don't give feet, some only give inches, and then some are laid out so that you can frame with them, so they're identified by certain marks. So you've got 16 inches on center, so when you're framing up a wall, those maybe stood out a little bit more on your tape measure, so you can quickly read on down the line. We also have other measuring tools that we use not only with making our marks. So once we figured out how to measure something, we then want to mark a line. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit later on when we start looking at our project again and laying out the lines to make our cuts. But for now, what I'd like for you to do is we're going to get into the habit of practicing those lines, okay? So what you can do at home, and what the curriculum is going to give you a practice with, is it's just going to give you some random lines, just like this, and then you're going to measure each line and then record. It's important that we write them down correctly, and so for that I'm going to go back to my sheet here. What do I mean by recording them correctly? Well, as you can see here, I've got 1 inch written out, and then 1 inch with this symbol above it. Two of these marks right here, so you can call them quotations or apostrophe, whatever you want. Two different ones. This is going to designate 1 inch. If it's just one mark, that's going to designate 1 foot. So they are completely different. And if you are making plans and you're writing things down on a grid sheet, just like that, you want to make those marks so that whoever reads them behind you knows what they are. So if you put just a 1, we don't know if it's 1 foot, 1 inch. So just make sure that you're recording it appropriately. So take those marks, measure them, record them at each line, and do this several times. I've only got 6 up here right now, but you could do as many as you want. Practice makes perfect. So like I said, it's a really important skill to master. So you want to practice as much as you can when it comes to measuring. You know, there's that old woodworking saying, measure twice, cut once. It's very true. You can't add material back on once you have cut it. Okay. Now, some of our other measuring tools that we'll have other than a tape measure. So I always keep my tape measure pretty handy, because it's one of the tools that you go to first, and then some kind of marking tool. So either a marker, a pencil is really handy to have close by. The next thing is going to be a square. There are several different types of squares out there, and I'm going to turn you just a little bit, and we will talk about some of those different types of squares. So we have what most people see typically on a job site or a woodworking site. You're going to see a speed square. Okay, it's a triangle. It has a lip right there, and that lip is so that it will hang on the material very evenly, so that you know it's good on this direction or this plane, and then you can make a 90-degree mark on that. This also has other numbers on there, and the reason it's called a speed square is because it's a quick reference for rise over run whenever you're doing rafters on a house, because those are angled cuts. So this is a quick reference or a faster way of making those marks. So that's why it's called a speed square. Then we have a framing square. Okay, it's very similar, does the same thing as a speed square. It's just not as fast, but it does rise over run as well for rafters or for stairs. People are building steps. So you'll need to know how to use this for rise over run to do that. So this is another square. There's no lip on this. It's just a flat piece of metal, okay, or plastic, whichever you get it in. But this is another type of square, so framing square. Then we have carpenter squares or woodworking squares that look like this. This is, and this may look like a framing square, but it's not. It is only marked on one side, not the other, so you can't do rise over run with this quickly. But this is another woodworking square. As you can see, there's another lip to it, as this piece can sit right on there. That helps me identify that this is flush to the top piece of the material, and then I can make a 90-degree angle. So this one does the same thing. It has the lip there, so you can hang it on a piece of wood. But this one is adjustable, so that you can make quick marks. If you want to, if you hold your pencil on this end, you can trace it down to make a even line. It also does a 45-degree angled cut and then a 90-degree angle. It has a level on there so that you can double check that you're level, square, plumb and true. The next two are more specialty type tools when it comes to woodworking. This is a ruler, but it's got marks on both sides, so that it doesn't matter which side you use. But it is metal, okay, and it's no different than a regular ruler. It just has those markings on there already for you to quick reference. And then this is a block square or a woodworking square again, just a regular one, but it's a smaller one, and it also has these small holes in here that are also designated with marks, and that way if you put a pencil in one of those holes, and then you can drag the material this way, and it will make a line at whatever mark you want it to make. So it makes laying out cut lines, and or if you're drilling pilot holes, if you want to make them all straight in a line, which you should want to do, it's easier to lay those out. So just some squares, layout tools, things that you should have at least one square, something that you can make sure to reference those cuts to make sure you're making 90-degree cuts or clean cuts. But for the most part, those specialty type squares you'll get into if you start doing more and more woodworking, things that are going to make it a little bit more easier when it comes to laying out lines. So practice, use your tape measure and get in the habit of that as much as you can. Now a lot of times I do want to point out that tape measures, there's a lot of play in this lip here, and that is for a reason, so that if you are butting up to a piece of material, it accounts for a 1/16 of an inch. If you are going to the outside of a material and pulling, okay, and pulling that material this way, it's going to allow that 1/16 of an inch as well. So this piece right here, the thickness of this metal is about a 1/16 of an inch. So if you butt it up against a piece of material, then it will account for that 1/16 of an inch in your layout lines. And then if you pull it, it's also going to allow for that same dimension, so that you don't, you're not a 1/16 of an inch off. So just understanding that tape measure, there is a reason for that play in that lip. Okay, you can pick up tape measures at any hardware store. You probably have one laying around the house at some point. So just practice, make those lines. Again, you can pick up the curriculum at 4-H Mall, or you can ask your 4-H agent if they have any at the office, or we can order it for you and help you get that level 1 measure up curriculum book that'll have a lot of different activities in it. The measuring is just one. The other levels have cutting activities as far as laying out lines and then practicing cutting the material with a saw, with a hand saw. Okay, and then there are some that deal with sanding. There are some activities about staining. There's some activities about learning types of wood. So they're a really good piece of curriculum to have if you are getting started in woodworking. So hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to your extension agent, 4-H agent. And again, my name is Patrick Allen, I'm a Scott County 4-H agent. Thank you for watching.